Are you worried about nuclear war? I know you are. Of course you are. Any sane person in our modern age would be worried about it. And this video is going to be the most useful tool you have yet to be able to prepare for such an atrocity. All right, let me show you a website I found, and I'm going to explain a little bit more how it works. Stick through this. This is going to be something you'll certainly want to watch. And I'll link this below so you can use it. It's the nuclear war map. Excellent. Simulations, maps, and references. First off, it talks about what happens in a nuclear attack. Great. We'll go through a quick attack simulation for a single city, as well as an attack simulation for a large-scale attack. And then probably one of the most important things is this database here. Let me click this real quick. This is some of the references they have and goes through state by state, showing where a lot of the military complexes are, and is it going to probably be a surface burst, what size kiloton device it's going to be, or an air burst, etc. So a really good database here, but going through the actual map itself, the different types of simulators is much more important. In fact, we're going to start with this single city attack simulator. And it works so nicely. I'm a Michigander. I live up here in Michigan. And I want to see, you know what happens if there's an attack here in Michigan? Now, I can go through their database, by the way, and I'll show you that again in a few minutes, how that comes into play with these simulators. But let's say I want to pick a city specifically in Michigan or near Michigan and see if an attack is going to affect us in our area. When I zoom in a little bit, you'll see the city of Mount Pleasant. This is the closest city that we live near. This is one of the places in which I teach martial arts. So obviously this whole area, I want to see if we have a problem here. Obviously, if we go to Mount Pleasant and I type in Mount Pleasant, Michigan, I can determine if it's going to be a 500 kiloton, which is a half a megaton device, and if it's going to be an air burst. So let's go ahead and just do that. Launch. Boom. All right, now we see specifically this red area, but as I zoom out, I actually live more up here, so I'll probably be okay if it's going to be an air burst. But that's an air burst, because air burst detonations, you don't usually have fallout. So how about we look at one that's a surface burst? Launch. Boom. All right, now you can see the fallout patterns. We'll talk more about this fallout pattern in a minute. You can see it heads off in this direction. I'm probably still going to be okay. I mean, Mount Pleasant is not a target anyway, but that's something you can kind of play around with and see what might be a target in your area. For example, I can go down a little bit and look at Lansing. Lansing, of course, being the capital of the state, might be a bigger target than Mount Pleasant. And let's say it's a really big target, and we're going to put it at a megaton. Launch. Boom. There we go. All right, so in this case, you'll see we have a much wider area of destruction, and the fallout zone, anybody heading in toward Flint, over into the Bay Area, we're going to be seeing some problems, obviously. Okay, up here, I'll be just fine. This is if the prevailing winds are going in this direction, by the way, and I want to talk about that for just a second. Prevailing winds are due to, practically speaking, two things. Number one, the rotation of the Earth. As the Earth rotates, there's not as much friction force for the air, so it makes it look like the air is going across the Earth this way, when in reality the Earth is turning underneath the atmosphere. It's really interesting how that works. So generally speaking, we often have prevailing winds going from west to east, all over the world. That is not a certain rule, even for specific locations, because when we talk about weather fronts, they come into play as well. Let me show you. If I simply just go to AccuWeather, this shows at any given time what the prevailing winds look like right now. So if I zoom into Michigan, remember, I just showed you a detonation in Lansing, and sure enough, look, the prevailing winds are going in this direction, and that indeed matches perfectly with the fallout zone from Lansing. And there's a term for that, by the way. It's called coincidence, because I've been playing with the simulators, and the simulators do not take into account prevailing winds. It takes into account general prevailing winds, but not atmospheric as far as storms and such coming through. That is something you'll need to look at if there's a detonation near you. And let me give you an example. Let's go up here and now go to New Orleans, and let's do a surface burst. Launch. Boom. Notice that he still has the prevailing winds going in this direction. So is that correct? If we go here, notice right now the winds are actually going through New Orleans from east to west, just the opposite direction. So the simulator is fantastic, especially when it looks at fallout zones, but you have to know at the time of the detonation which way the winds are heading. For New Orleans, they're going in this direction, not this direction. Why is that? So if you'll notice, if I actually go up a little bit and zoom out, you can see that there's a giant spiral taking place right here, right over Mississippi perhaps? And if I go over this weather map right now, here we are, there's a high pressure weather system right now. So when you see high pressure weather systems, you'll often have the winds going around those high pressure systems in a clockwise direction. And that's exactly what we see here. So we have a high pressure system right here, and you'll see the winds going around it in a clockwise direction. So anything below that, or to the south, I should say, you will see the winds going opposite of the typical prevailing winds, something definitely to keep into account of. Notice out here on the west coast off of California, we have two high pressure systems. So we should see a clockwise here and a clockwise here. And sure enough, there they are. One clockwise here, one clockwise here. Notice up here in our friends to the north, we have a low pressure system. Anytime you see a low pressure system, it's going to give you a counterclockwise. So above that, or to the north of that system, you should see winds going also from east to west. And there it is. Look, here's that system. So if there was a nuclear detonation here, this is where you have to worry about the fallout zone going in the opposite direction. So a lot of stuff to look at as far as weather goes. Obviously important for you to know because you want to know where that fallout goes. The detonation obviously is flat out deadly. Anything within that zone is typically going to die. I talked about this in our nuclear series, but that fallout, do not underestimate that. And I think that's the biggest problem is people underestimate the fallout. You can't see the radiation, so you think, oh, it's outside, I'll be okay here, and you will not be okay because that fallout, sometimes even if the wind's going this way, you'll have a lot of fallout on this side of the house, but this side of the house you may not. Or maybe it hits the roof and falls down, and here it doesn't hit the roof, it goes past. It's something to keep in mind. Okay, so beyond linking these here, you want to be able to now take that first database, which I'll show you again, and start going through some different types of scenarios to see where possibly the fallout might come as you prepare. So we'll come back to our map now, and now we're looking at, here's Kansas City, here's Kansas, here's Missouri. Down here in Missouri, let's see if I can find Knob Noster. Yeah, here it is. Knob Noster, just outside of Orangeburg, is Whiteman Air Force Base, home of our amazing B-2s, which are nuclear bombers. This is all part of SAC, Strategic Air Command. You'll see these jets take off in case we are under attack and they get out of there very quickly. So obviously a target. Let's see what the simulator says when we see a detonation there at Whiteman. And by the way, there's going to be multiple detonations at Whiteman, not just one. I couldn't find Knob Noster in their database, so we'll just do Warrensburg. We'll go ahead and just do a megaton again on the surface. Again, there's going to be a lot more. Launch. Boom, there it is. So obviously a detonation here. Here's Whiteman Air Force Base. Obviously the fallout zone alone would be enough here, and Whiteman is actually in the outer zone. And the Russians have multiple warheads for this area, and they're not going to send just one. So Whiteman Air Force Base and the surrounding area is certainly going to be hit. So if you live in Sedalia, especially if the winds are going this direction, big trouble. If you live in Kansas City, Lee Summit, etc., maybe not so much of a problem here, but which way are the winds going? The winds are going pretty close to it. Instead of going east-northeast, they're going more northeast. So going here instead of this direction, more like this direction. So if you live in Macon, you may be in the path of this fallout. This is the first thing you need to do. Find out where you live on this database and go through some scenarios. Just understand the fallout does not always go from west to east, or in this case, a little bit in the up direction, not at all. Now let's look at a little bit more advanced simulator. If I go back to this one, instead of single city, let's look at large scale attack simulator. This one's neat. Again, it's still, I don't want to say flawed, but it's still based on for the fact that we see prevailing winds generally going from west to east. That very well may be different if there's a time of attack. But what it does, it takes the United States, looks at the arsenal of Russia, looks at the type of complement of warheads, how many there are, what size warheads, etc., looks at the populations of the cities, takes all of that into account, military bases, etc., and shows what it looked like for a large-scale attack. Let's take a look. All right, here we go. So far, 0 minutes, 0 targets, 0 warheads, etc., but now we launch. Boom. Every time you see a little orange thing pop up, that's showing there's something happening in that state. You can click on that state specifically, like I can zoom in. Even though the attack is down here near St. Louis, you can click on Illinois itself and see what's happening. But overall, you can start to see some of the fallout. Now, some of these hits, like that just took place right here in Lansing, notice there's no fallout. That's because this was an airburst. And those airbursts, here's another one, are intended to take out, like, for example, through an EMP, the electronic devices for the area. There's another one, and a double attack. This one's going to be a ground burst or a surface burst. And whenever you see a surface burst, that's where you see the fallout zones from. But as I zoom out, you will certainly start seeing some of the major targets here in the United States. All of this, as we mentioned before, is called the nuclear sponge. This is where the majority of our nuclear warheads are located, either through missiles or if we go down to Missouri through our B-2s, etc. But anyway, all this obviously is a big hot zone. In Colorado, look at this one. This is Colorado Springs, home of so many different types of bases. From Peterson Air Force Base to Cheyenne Mountain, which is NORAD, to Fort Carson, where I was stationed for a while. There is a lot of military here, and they're going to be doing a lot of surface burst. It was estimated when they built NORAD, one nuclear warhead at the time could probably not penetrate the mountain, but obviously look at the amount of, look, there's another one. Hit after hit after hit will take out NORAD, and that is one of the strategies of the Russians if there is an all-out nuclear attack. All right, so now it's going through. We've now had 132 million people die, 933 warheads launched, and you can see a general picture of where the attacks are, and it seems kind of sporadic, but it's not. It really is based mostly on military-type bases. The Russians will also be hitting infrastructure as well. The reason I say Russians, by the way, is because the Chinese obviously have nuclear weapons too, but nowhere compared to the amount of nuclear warheads the Russians have. It's simply incredible. But again, look, if I take my little hand and it goes in this direction, it's showing you the general prevailing winds as it goes across the United States this way. It doesn't account for a weather front that if it happened today, we will see it going in this direction here and this direction here, pushing the winds south of San Francisco, south of LA, etc., and we'll see the fallout patterns going in this direction. All right, so at the end of this specific simulation, we see the Russians launched over 1,000 warheads. They have almost 6,000, by the way. 578 cumulative tons, megatons that is, and 187 million people in the United States died, which is interesting because look, if this is only about 1/6 of their complement and it took out about half the United States as far as population goes, and it could be far worse than that, obviously. But the simulator site, which again I'm going to link below, I highly recommend you play with this thing a lot. Really get a feel for where you live, fallout zones, bug out locations. Everything you want to look at is right there for you. You do have to take into account those winds. Generally, they go from west to east, but if a front goes over, which happens all the time, by the way, they seriously may just completely change directions on you at any time, and it could happen anywhere. So don't think that just like, for example, Alabama's going to have that change. No, that could happen anywhere in the United States. So when the detonation happens, that's something you need to look at very quickly, see which way the prevailing winds are going to make sure the fallout patterns are not heading in your direction. Now, one of the things I always recommend, obviously, is my Geiger counter, which I show all the time. I'll link it below. Because no matter which way the winds go and stuff, you want to be able to see if the food you have, that's the most important thing, is radioactive, and you can check that out with the Geiger counter. I have more videos about the Geiger counter coming out soon because I know another channel came out with a video talking about the Geiger counters like this one and saying it doesn't work well, and I'm going to prove to you that that's not true in the least little bit. So if you do have this one and you saw that video, rest assured you have the right Geiger counter. All right, anyways, put in the comments below. Tell me what you're looking at after you do the simulator a few times around where you live and see if you're in a danger zone. Because unfortunately, especially when you talk about military targets, etc., there's a lot of danger zones across the country. But as always, thanks for stopping by. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.